Hello, everyone. My name is Mark LeDuc of SAE's International Engineering Event Staff, and on behalf of SAE's Detroit section, welcome to part 2 of the Urban Mobility Roundtable series. The goal of the Urban Mobility series is to convey the automotive supply chain, products producers, and the city planners. That would be to convene the automotive supply chain producers, city planners, and have that critical conversation necessary to bring smart and connected vehicle into the infrastructure ecosystem as requested by the consumer. The purpose of the Detroit section is to generate local activities that extend SAE benefits to its 6,000 members. To achieve this, you can see on the screen we do a myriad of vehicle launches, technical meeting tours, social events, and most recently of virtual events like what we have here today. To help promote awareness for future members, the section also provides collegiate chapters at local universities and educational STEM programs for K through 12 students. The format of our discussion is a series of short perspective statements on the topic, followed by some opening discussions and then audience questions. So as an audience member, your participation is critical to this session, so please ask your questions through the chat function located on the upper right of your screen to provide any questions you are seeking answers to. Please make sure to indicate to whom the question is directed, or say all if you wish the entire panel to share their insights. We ask that you participate in our numerous polls located in the Events tab. I will launch one very shortly. It's critical that you do that so that the participants of this discussion can understand your viewpoints on those polls and interject those into our discussion today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Alex Bonneau. I hope I pronounced that right, Andy. You are the founder of Speakeasy Media, and clearly your biography speaks for itself based upon your interest and involvement into the issue of urban mobility, and you have a great presence in the community around conversations related to the mobility industry, and you have received numerous accolades that you can see on the screen here. I'll allow you to talk through any of those that you like. So at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Andy.
Thanks, Mark, and SAE for hosting this important series. I'm Andy Bonneau, and I'll be moderating today's forum on smart city planning. I founded Speakeasy Media as an outlet for consulting work to help clients plan systems, technology, and public spaces that are designed for human needs. My happy place is asking questions like why and what if related to the built environment. That sometimes comes across like childlike questions, but I find it extraordinarily useful. I may have a degree in civil engineering, but that's not what I study. I study people. And I'm excited about today's forum because I find myself throughout my career and today living in a Venn diagram of two worlds. I'm in that blurry middle spot. One world is emerging technology, which includes smart cities. That's innovation that can dramatically change our day-to-day behavior. The other world I'm in is new urbanism. That's organic development, timeless design philosophy built at a human scale. These two worlds are often considered to be in conflict, but I think that's because of a basic language barrier between the two. I'm active with both of those worlds, so I know the jargon and the position statements of each. They think that they're on their own, and I'm purposefully generalizing, but they think that they're at odds with each other. And you might say, I'm trying to be a Rosetta Stone for these industries. I find incredible opportunity in the peaceful overlap of walkable neighborhoods and smart cities. For example, I know that mobile phones make bicycling more accessible. I know autonomous vehicles will make streets safer for kids and adults. I know that ubiquitous internet will free us to work close to home or even completely eliminate the commute. The way to break through communication barriers is to bring ideas into focus. The terminology and jargon, sometimes important, is secondary. When any parents out there are going to relate to this. When my boys were infants and toddlers, they didn't have a grasp on language. They made plenty of sounds, a wall of sounds, but how could I understand them? I was subconsciously looking at context. Is he banging on the fridge door? Is he pointing out the window at a tree, smiling, laughing? The big idea would come into focus, and then I could communicate with this similar but different being. And that's what I'd like to plant in your mind as we start this conversation. When you're thinking of questions about tactics and strategies, bring the idea, the why, into focus. This is especially true when we get into issues about governance, policy, and regulations. Rules about land use and infrastructure are often at odds with human behavior. And if you're in an OEM or manufacturing side of this industry, you might not see this kind of thing until it's too late, finding out what policies are seemingly of yesteryear. But we've got to be able to identify the ways in which society has outgrown some forms of governance. And one example comes to mind, the brick and mortar bank. I'm a Gen Xer, so my first savings account was opened in the 80s by going with my mom to a bank, an actual physical bank. She filled out a form. We waited in the lobby. Then we had an interview with one of those well-dressed people behind a fancy desk. And meanwhile, there was this steady stream of people filing along the velvet rope, depositing and withdrawing money. And in the US, if the developer plans to build a bank in a shopping center, they have to submit a traffic study to the local government agency. That study will include a prediction about how many cars will come and go during a typical weekday. It's based on decades of studies by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. So it's not like any developer can just give out a number. So 150 or 200 trips per day was the common answer. That's how many cars would come and go out of a bank. And then seemingly overnight, people of all ages have access to internet banking on your phone or on your computer. We rarely drive to a bank. I don't even have a branch of my bank in my state. And yet the rules of development continue to be enforced. So in this next hour, challenge the panelists to bring the big ideas into focus as we get into practical applications of smart city planning. Each of our panelists is going to take a few minutes to introduce some of the work that they're involved in right now. And then after that, we're going to get into the group discussion and answer your questions. So first, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and then turn it over to them one by one. Justin Snowden is Senior Advisor at the City of Detroit Office of Mobility Innovation. Blaine Leonard is Transportation Technology Engineer at the Utah Department of Transportation. Dominic Papa is Vice President at Smart State Initiatives at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And Sophia Moore is the Chief Innovation Officer at CODA in Columbus, Ohio. So Justin, let's start with you and get a few minutes of your perspective.
Sure, Andy, thanks for that introduction. So Justin Snowden here. I'm a Senior Advisor with the City of Detroit's Office of Mobility Innovation. One thing that we know about cities is that they're typically full of rich stories and architecture. Unfortunately, when we describe cities, we talk about them in terms of KPIs. And while it's great to understand things like the number of COVID tests that have been administered, it misses the fundamental importance, the fundamental elements of what a city is. At a very base level, cities are geospatial. And so we think about describing cities in terms of maps. But across departments, we understand that different departments use different maps. A mayor or city council may be interested in cities by district, but for a Department of Transportation, they're interested in cities by roads. So at the City of Detroit, in order to move beyond not only KPIs, but to move beyond maps, we're developing what we're referring to as base units. They're the fundamental elements, the building blocks that we can use to effectively describe cities. In the City of Detroit, there are four. We have parcels and building footprints and IDs. We have addresses. But in my line of work, we're focused on the right-of-way. Interestingly enough, our base units even have base units. And our right-of-way is one of those items. We think about the right-of-way, and it's this amorphous term, But when we drill down into that, there are actually 9 different elements of what make up a right-of-way. From alleyways, roadways, and berms, to things like curbs, which is of particular importance today as we're thinking about how to more effectively manage curb space. So as we're describing cities, we're thinking about it not only in terms of the base units, but then breaking the base units down into smaller classes. And that's really where our data management strategy comes into play. We understand that cities have tons and tons of data, but often those data sets are siloed by departments. By attaching those data sets to the fundamental building blocks, the base units, in some cases, things like curbs and alleyways, we believe that we can overcome a lot of those departmental silos and create systems where departments that access a particular asset have access to all the data that's related to that asset. So the curb data set, for instance, whether it's being accessed by the bus department or water sewage or public works, will be able to see all the data sets that are attached to that element and make more strategic, more effective, and efficient decisions on how to deliver city services. That's all I have.
Blaine, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Andy, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm with the State Department of Transportation in Utah. As you might expect, we have a jurisdiction over interstate highways throughout the state. We also have jurisdiction on many local roads, mostly arterials that pass through the states and go through the middle of many urban and rural cities. And so we engage with and have partnerships with cities and counties throughout the state and try to work together as we all move forward. One of our primary focuses, in fact, I think our most important focus as a state DOT is safety. We want to make sure that people are safe as they commute. We certainly want efficiency in that system as well. We want to make sure people get home safely and get to their families. And so that drives what we do. In my group, the Transportation Technology Group, we are doing, as Andy described, we're looking for ideas with practical outcomes. We're looking for innovations that we can employ that have some kind of a useful benefit at the far end. Our group focuses on a number of things, but one of our primary focuses is connected vehicles, the ability of vehicles to talk with each other and to share information with the infrastructure. And we have a fairly broad and rapidly growing deployment of connected vehicle technology around the state, and we're trying to use it in ways that are practical. We've partnered with our transit agencies, for instance, and have improved their schedule reliability based on our systems. We're also interested in automated vehicles and the role they will play. As a government agency, we will likely never own significant numbers of automated vehicles. We certainly won't develop them, but we're involved in the regulation of those, and we're also very interested in how those can improve safety for our citizens. And so, for instance, we recently completed an 18-month trial of a low-speed electric automated shuttle. We wanted to understand how it worked, what it could be used for, whether it can fit into a transit system as a first-mile, last-mile solution, and other kinds of things. And we've studied public trust of automated vehicles. Our system relies on communication, and we have a vast fiber optic network in the state that provides communication to all of our devices around the state. And I think that's a key for both smart states and smart cities. So I'm excited to talk about some of these things today and to share with the other panelists and with you who have joined us today some of our insights. Thank you very much.
Let's hear from you next.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this conversation because although I work for the Arizona Commerce Authority, which is a state economic development agency, I'm a local government guy. I got my master's in public administration, so I'm a big governance nerd. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how we're creating the governance platforms that can really help accelerate the adoption and implementation of emerging technologies that can help solve urban and social challenges and really improve the quality of life for all people. And so that saying at the top, really what the platforms that you see are based on a wise saying from a wise gentleman. You know, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So we really believe in Arizona that collaboration is our next competitive advantage. And so the platforms that you see on the screen and that we'll talk about today are based on collaboration. And by the way, that saying is from Jack Black, Kung Fu Panda. So you know we're on to something good here. Not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, for those of you that don't know the Greater Phoenix region, we're the fastest growing county. I think the fastest growing for the last 3 years, fourth largest in the country. We've got City of Phoenix, the fifth largest city, fastest growing in population also. We've got the number one largest public research institution in Arizona State University. We've got the number one largest community college district in the country. We've got 22 jurisdictions all stand up right next to each other in this Greater Phoenix region. And so about a year and a half ago, we started talking to each other. We realized that urban challenges, traffic congestion doesn't start in Phoenix and stop in Tempe, right? These challenges cross municipal boundaries. Why are we taking a siloed approach and building smart cities? Why not try to get these 22 cities, towns, and the county to think together, act together, innovate together, and then procure technology and infrastructure together and build one smart region and outscale everyone else that was focused on building smart cities? Let's collaborate, share resources in order to solve challenges at scale. And so we launched what we're calling the Connective in November of 2019. And again, it's meant to be this collaboration platform to bring cities together with private industry and with academia to really help accelerate the adoption and implementation of solutions that can help solve challenges. And so once we launched that, that's when kind of my boss, Sandra Watson at the ACA, thanks to her leadership, said, why don't you come work for the state and help scale out this kind of governance framework across the entire state, so that way all cities, all levels of government can really benefit from this innovative new model, rural communities, urban communities. And so now that I've been at the state, we've really started to think about what does a smart state platform look like? And what we've realized is that, where the cities are set up pretty horizontal, the state is really set up very vertical, right? Very vertically focused. And so, right, cities like to be Renaissance people. They have to be good at everything. They have so many lines of service: police, fire, water, trash, recycling. They have to be good at all those. They can't really be experts at anything. However, at the state, we're very vertically focused, right? We have the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Transportation. So we can really focus on driving vertical innovation deep into these key areas of emphasis for our state. And so, we thought about this idea of creating a smart state, and we realized that we were already doing this. The governor had launched the Institute for Automated Mobility back in 2018, which is a public-private partnership to really help accelerate the adoption of autonomous vehicles into Arizona. And it was a huge success, a big boom, right? People like Waymo and Intel Mobileye are testing their vehicles here. And so now what we're really focused on and what we're building out the concept for is what you see on the right side of the screen, this idea around a mega region mobility innovation zone. And the real concept behind that mobility innovation zone is this multi-regional commercialization testbed, providing the framework to empower these industry leaders to, in cooperation with government, the universities, and our utility partners, to really rapidly and seamlessly deploy these emerging mobility technologies across jurisdictions. And just to finish, a big part of this mobility innovation zone is about e-mobility, right? And so the goal of kind of e-mobility pilots within this mobility innovation zone framework is really to help accelerate the progress on our regional and state e-mobility challenges, as well as really showcasing Arizona as this international leader in the future of mobility. And so we're really excited. Again, it's more about the governance platforms, the frameworks that we're building to really enable both industry and academia to come to Arizona, deploy technologies, solve challenges, and scale those technologies. So excited to talk more.
Or Dominic, sorry. Sophia, can you jump in next?
Hi, thanks for having me here. My name is Sophia Moore. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at CODA. To give a little bit of background to the audience about CODA, it is the Central Ohio Transit Authority. Columbus is also a fast-growing region. We're the 11th fastest growing city in the United States. And with all that growth, mobility is really a focus in this region. We really understand if we're going to want to experience the type of growth and sustain it and still be a great place to live, that mobility needs to be at the heart of it. So that's where the CODA comes in. we have really tried to focus on not just transportation, but mobility. And we have a number of different aspects that we're focusing on right now. We're really trying to take transportation and look at it in a different way to meet what the people are needing, meeting the needs that people are trying to address. Some of the things that we're working on here at CODA is a bus on demand. Last year, we were the first organization to do full-time bus on demand in the United States. So it's taking one of our larger vehicles, and very much like a TNC, is you would stand at a stop and you'd actually call that vehicle. And the amazing thing about it is that a bus stop that you may have had to wait 45 to 60 minutes for the next vehicle to arrive, we're experiencing about a 12 to 15 minute response time. So you can imagine what that does to mobility in an area when we can have bus on demand, and we're getting some really great responses with that. Another interesting project that we're working on is an artificial intelligence project in the region. Very much like they were talking about with the Arizona area, we're trying to revolutionize the traffic management system. If we can get all of the different regions in Central Ohio to talk to each other and share information, we can start to be more predictive about where traffic concerns are coming, where congestion is coming, where accidents may be happening. And taking all of those feeds of data and actually having all of those different groups work together in a cloud-based system where we can be more proactive about what's happening, more responsive to accidents that may be occurring, and provide that information to the public. So this is something where we got an FTA grant focusing on artificial intelligence as a pilot for the rest of the United States to see how we can bring all these different data sources together. And lastly, we're looking at revolutionizing our fare management system. We understand that we have to look at all different groups of our community. So we're looking to make sure that we have an equitable fare system with our fare management system. And not only are we using technologies as mobile, which would be something that we'd be focusing on, but how can we make sure it's equitable? So one of the things that we're focusing on is fare capping. So sometimes individuals would not be able to buy a pass because they can't afford for the entire financial outlay. With this new system that we'll be rolling out, if someone hits the cap, so for example, if our bus pass is $75, once you've spent $75 a month, you won't be charged anymore. So you can see how that that technology is starting to really make a difference in towards our community by allowing them to have access to things they would not have access for, allowing them to keep a couple of dollars in their wallet they may not have been able to do, and using it more efficiently. So I'm excited to be on this session and excited for being able to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Some exciting things that I want to derail this and go down rabbit trails, but I will resist. That's exciting work that each one of you is involved in. It's also great. I'm sure the other folks that are listening in are excited to hear both from the local perspective and the statewide perspective. Similar, but different, of course. So let's talk about a few things that are impacting all of us, both at the local and the state level. We're all, Sophia just mentioned FTA grants. We're all paying attention to federal funding. And so many smart city initiatives are connected in some way to mass transit. It seems like ages since Obama was president, but back then when he had his infrastructure stimulus, it funded a lot of highway projects around the country. So if we're thinking about smart cities connected to mass transit, what can Biden's administration do differently to encourage integrated mobility and save public transit, if that is in fact what we should be doing? Justin, let me start with you.
Mentioned, whereas President Obama's initiatives focused on interstate transportation, typically across large distances, I think that President Biden would do well to focus on transportation improvements at the local level that leverage private sector technology in ways that make citywide mass transit more attractive. So think about autonomous shuttles for first mile, last mile connections to buses or to subways. If that's accomplished, if he puts his dollars there, then I believe that he'll see huge improvements not only in mass transit adoption in cities like Detroit, where that's been a huge sort of decades-long struggle. But you'll also see a decrease in the dependency on single-occupant vehicles, and probably realize some clean energy initiatives that are also at the forefront of his administration.
DOTs, they are often tasked with long distance highways, heavy infrastructure. And I mean, traditionally, they were throughout the country, they were called the highway department rather than the transportation department. What are your thoughts on this from a federal funding point of view? How can next rounds of stimulus promote or preserve mass transit?
So a few minutes ago, Dominic talked a lot about collaboration and sharing, and I'll probably bring that topic up periodically here. Collaboration is really the key, and anything that the administration can do to encourage collaboration is helpful to break down some of those barriers between the state, which is vertically siloed, and the cities, which are sort of horizontal, as Dominic described. So we've had a good working relationship with our transit agency over the last few years and used connected vehicle technology to help them improve their reliability. And so it's been a collaboration between two agencies that sometimes appear to be at odds, but we're not. Our goal is to move people efficiently and safely, and we both have that same goal, and so we work together. The other thing the Biden administration could do, in the connected vehicle world, we're currently faced with a challenge from the FCC. And the FCC has recently reduced the amount of spectrum we have available to beneficially use connected vehicle technology to save lives. And they've reduced that spectrum, and they've also placed unlicensed Wi-Fi adjacent to us and allowed power levels that cause significant interference, which may have the ability to wipe out the effectiveness of connected vehicle technology. So the Biden administration could step in and intervene with the FCC to try to solve these two problems. This technology will help us and collaborate with local agencies and transit to make things more efficient and safer, and we need the technology, and they could step in that way.
Federal funding and Biden's priorities.
Yeah, honestly, I think Justin and Blaine just knocked it out of the park. I think everything they said was right on key. Maybe just to add something else, what we're really focused on is underserved and unserved communities. And so, last mile is a big issue here in Greater Phoenix in Arizona. I mean, when it's 115 degrees, you're not going to walk even a half a mile to access that bus stop, right? And so we're really focused on, that last mile service. And so any focus on that would be a big help. Also, I'm not very technical. However, we try to take the systems level approach to smart cities here, right? It's no longer just a transportation project, but it's transportation, it's connectivity, it's health, right? All integrated into one. And so how, as they're looking at federal stimulus for broadband, federal stimulus for mobility, federal stimulus for telehealth, how can we start to combine, a lot of the stimulus dollars so that way we can mobilize all the resources possible to make those resources stretch as far as we can. So that's all I might be able to add on that, because I thought Blaine and Justin knocked it out of the park.
This from a federal funding and grant point of view?
Yeah, I think everyone answered it really, really well. And I think the last point that Dominic mentioned is that there's funding to make sure that we focus on the entire community. As we update this infrastructure, I think we want to make sure that no one has been left behind in this. And I think that's going to be a really important part. But I think overall, having that focus on innovation in the public area and taking some of those learnings from private and really starting to make those change, I think the federal level can really be a boost for all of us being able to do some of that.
Let's talk briefly. I don't think we can solve the issues of COVID entirely, but there's some from a smart cities point of view that I'd certainly like to hear some input on. Let's assume COVID vaccines are widely available. Let's take a peek into the not so distant future. What are the pain points for city planners? We've got folks joining this call who are on the supplier and manufacturing side, and often they learn about the true nature of the city planner's pain points after something is already on the street or something's on the shelf, so to speak. So while they're in the development or the research stages, it would be of great benefit for those folks to understand what's going through the minds of city planners. So what are the pain points for city planners? And then what are also the pain points for the traveling public? How can technology solve those sorts of pain points? I mean, you heard in my biases in the opening about wanting walkable, bikeable networks. How can we embrace technology for these sorts of things? How can we help our clients who are developing these solutions to know that they're making the right painkiller? Dominic, what do you think?
And honestly, I think public-private partnerships are key here. So I'll just give an example of what we're doing in Arizona around the Institute for Automated Mobility. So again, that was an executive order established by the governor to help really drive the future of autonomous vehicles in Arizona. But it's a public-private partnership. So it includes people like Intel Mobileye, State Farm, Exponent. It includes governments, so the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, and then it includes all 3 universities. And what that is able to do is, right, it gives the government, the policymakers, the regulation makers, kind of a peek around the corner of what industry is working on, right? It allows government to see what Intel Mobileye is developing as they're starting to plan the infrastructure needs for the future, right? And so they can kind of match make where industry is going with where they're deciding both infrastructure and regulation should go as well. And of course, if you really want to see far in the future, that's where the universities come in great, because they're really working on some cutting edge research that might be 10, 15 years out. And so I really think when it comes to the future planning of cities, you have to leverage public-private partnerships. You've got to bring everyone around the table. So that way you have both the infrastructure owners and operators together with industry who's really leveraging kind of the technology to innovate. So that way you can match make the two. And so that's I guess my point of view is really bring these people together to Blaine's point and collaborate moving forward.
To transition to you, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, and especially from the state point of view, your perspective on public-private partnerships, helping solve pain points.
So we believe these partnerships are essential, and the partnerships start with intergovernmental partnerships, the state with the cities and counties, but they expand to the technology providers. And one of the things we've done that I mentioned is fiber. We have 3,300 miles of fiber throughout the state. We've only built a third of that. The other 2/3 came from the private sector, 24 telecommunications companies that we share fiber with, and we help them get the right of way or provide right of way to them. Sometimes we lay the conduit and they lay the fiber. Sometimes they lay the whole thing and give fiber back to us. Just a collaboration here to allow us to communicate together. But we also have a challenge as we look at technologies. So today, technologies are rapidly emerging. All kinds of things are coming at us. And frankly, the vendors of those technologies desperately want to sell those to us. We have a hard time sorting out the differences between those technologies and the difference between what is being proffered to us and what they actually do. And we're limited in our procurement rules as to how we can procure those and use those and make decisions based on those. So some collaboration with the private sector to allow us to really understand these various products and how they interact or don't interact, how they overlap and what they do would be very useful for us.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear next from Sophia and Justin on this point, because Blaine, what you just mentioned about really messaging, it's two people talking at each other and not really, they think that they're speaking the same language, but maybe it's different dialects. So Sophia, I'd like to hear from you next on this.
Sure, and I think the biggest part of the technology is the data. And even though in the traditional sense, we would be studying past data to determine where we're going in the future, everything has changed because of COVID. But if you have all of your technology and all of your data set up, I think that will allow us to quickly adjust, maybe better than we would have in the past. In the past, you may have looked at the data and then maybe something wouldn't change for a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. But I think with the additional focus on data, it's going to be more important to understand, is rush hour going to be rush hour anymore? Where are those peaks and valleys as people commute? Has that changed? Is it going to be busy overall with no big peaks? We're going to have to understand how the customer is changing, how the customer is moving, and using that data to quickly make sure that we are still meeting the needs of the community as they move forward. And I think we're going to have to be pretty quickly in lockstep with what's going on. And I think technology and that focus on data is going to be a big part of that as we go in the future.
Justin, at the city level, how do you respond to address these issues like Blaine brought up about not understanding what a particular technology or product is for? I see this all the time in the mobility as a service space where 3 different vendors have something that on a website looks delightful, but maybe they're just describing the future. Maybe they're not actually describing what their thing does. So how do you get to the bottom of what it is that a vendor is offering so that they really know, okay, this is the painkiller that I'm looking for?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think the key point, and I think this is where maybe even at the federal level we can get help, is when there are wins in particular cities, how can we share that information with others? I saw a question in the chat about, someone might be hearing something that Columbus is doing. How does my city get started with that? And I think with all of us sharing our information and finding a platform to being able to do that, because I agree, I get bombarded with all sorts of things and I just don't, sometimes just cannot figure out which one might be the best for me. But if I knew of others that may have tested it and how they used it and what were their use cases, I think that's going to be a big thing where we can share this information among others to figure out what's right for me, because a vendor that might be good for me may not be good for another one, right? But need to understand how I use it and if it matches what their use cases are.
Justin, how about you? How are you guys managing the communication efforts so that you understand truly what it is that's on the marketplace and in solving these pain points, both for city planners and then also for just the general traveling public?
Yeah, that's a multifaceted question. I'd say in terms of technology, the adage, the private sector has all the watches, but the public sector has all the time. And so oftentimes, as a public official, I'm presented with technology. And if I've got to really think about what it is and what it does and make the business case for the technology to be deployed, then ultimately it probably doesn't fit the needs that I've stated. So in terms of thinking about deploying private sector technology, ultimately it's got to address the stated need and not be shoehorned in some, end around way that sort of works but sort of doesn't, ultimately is doing a disservice to residents and the people that have been hired to serve. You've got to, on the private side, sort of make the things that the public sector is asking for. And on the public side, we need to state clear objectives that the private sector can target.
I want to ask a question that came in from the audience. They were asking specifically about Ohio and Arizona, but I think there's a way to look at this from all 4 of your points of view. And the question is around what or who was the catalyst to starting smart city initiatives? And how would you suggest smaller cities start to get involved in mobility initiatives in their region? I see this question asked in different contexts related to smart city kind of things. Again, mobility on demand, mobility as a service is a common one where some people have some great ideas, or they've watched a webinar, or they've been to a presentation and gotten inspired, and they're not sure, okay, but how do I get from 0 to 1? So how would you suggest people get from 0 to 1 in a smaller area around the country?
Interestingly enough, I think that this begins by forming a coalition of departments within a city that all have a related, but maybe differently stated goal. So in terms of mobility, I think about the opportunities for my department to work with planning and development, housing and revitalization, and public works. In that instance, we're all going to leverage a common asset. The asset is limited. And so how do we come together then to make the most of that asset so that it can address all of the needs of those different groups, whether it's moving people, whether it's moving people from one place to another, whether it's very specific and moving people from their house to work, whether it's making the most of the right-of-way. So I think that it's in terms of getting started, you first got to look internally within the city, find out who those individuals are that have an interest that's sort of related to yours, that rely on a common asset, and then form the coalition to then start thinking about different technologies that can make the most of that limited asset in a way that addresses all the different departments' needs.
Blaine, let's go to you next on this. Getting people from 0 to 1, or maybe it's another state agency, getting them started. What can they be looking at as a catalyst?
So I would say two things. First of all, sometimes initiatives get started because one person takes the initiative to do it. And some of the things we do in our agency are because I saw it or I came up with the idea and I just grab the bull by the horns and go out and find the resources and figure it out and get it done. I find people who want to collaborate with that. I approach them and make it work. So the first thing is just take the initiative and go get started. Secondly, I think we often can benefit by looking around in our area to find out who else is doing it and then approach them. I'm working closely with one particular city on a fairly large scale connected vehicle deployment because they reached out to me. They came to me some time ago and said, we're interested in doing X. You look like you're kind of doing that. Can we work together? It took me a while to find the opportunity to make that happen, but they approached me. So look for someone else who's doing it and participate with them, join their ranks, learn from them, offer to share with them, offer to be part of their project.
Dominic, let's go to you next. What got your statewide initiative started? You touched on this a little bit, but what can people steal from you in their community?
Yeah, I think, from our unique perspective in the regional approach and then the statewide approach, what we recognize right away is leveraging existing organizations that are in the communities that especially small communities already belong to. So for example, here we have a regional economic development organization called the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. It's tasked with driving economic development business for all 22 cities. And so every city was already a member of that. And so we realized that we can leverage that organization to hit all 22 and talk to all 22 right away. Also, the regional MPOs, at least here, every city in the region already belonged to the Maricopa Association of Governments, right? So those were two organizations we knew right away that we could go to speak to every city at once instead of having to go out to each city or just working with Phoenix only and hoping the rest came on board. We went to those organizations, leveraged their existing membership to get all the cities on board to really sell that vision, that mission of what we were trying to do around building a smart region. So I would really suggest leveraging regional groups if you're looking to do a regional approach.
Ohio, what ideas have been sticky for you guys? What can other people steal from Columbus?
I think with the modern technology that we have right now with webinars such as this, it actually provides more accessibility. So I agree with what everyone else has said about utilizing those regional partnerships, but also asking partner cities. So I'll give a very specific example that kind of exemplifies what each of the panelists are saying. When we were focused on our artificial intelligence project, which we still are, we had to get a lot of our regional partners connected with us. And what we did is this particular technology had already been rolled out in Las Vegas on a smaller scale. And through technology, rather than having everybody visit Las Vegas, which of course would be fun, we had a very large webinar with them where they talked about the changes that their city saw. And we had all different parts of their we're kind of replicating what they did in Las Vegas by bringing those the same people in there, and allowed for that question and answer session. And that one session, we got great viewership, great questions, and great connection and collaboration on it. So I think all of these things, it takes one step at a time to make these things happen. It doesn't happen just by itself. But I think, being able to, the new technology, or, the technology we're all used to now by bidding on video, actually allowed us to have more people hear what was going on in another city, rather than just having 3 or 4 people do a site visit. So we found that extremely beneficial as we were working with all of our regional partners.
Sophia, if you want to hang on, I want to stick with you for a moment. I want to combine a couple of the questions that came in. One of them was directed at me, but I think it's good to hear from everybody on this. And this is just all related to these issues of people politics. So from the Catalyst point of view, you all are talking in different ways about partnering up with somebody else, or finding fellow conspirators to take an idea forward and make something happen. From a different point of view, the roadblocks, the challenges, are also often people related. So that's sometimes user experience on an app or a technology. Sometimes it seems to be a great innovation breakthrough, and yet it doesn't solve the true pain. So the user experience is, bleh, why am I going to try this? I don't need this. Or, oh, 5 more apps I've got to download? No thanks. So there are those types of people issues. And then there's just the kind of red team, blue team politics that we're all bombarded with every time we open up our phone to look for news, or even if we're trying to avoid news. We just see this us versus them constantly. So how do you get around? What are some of these things to identify so that we can kind of break through barriers, hopefully as diplomatically as possible, but just being aware? What are some of the obstacles that are people related, both on the product kind of user experience side, but then also on the solutions, like solving problem side?
Sure. A great example of that we're currently going through right now is rolling out our fare management system. The fare management system has to make sure that incorporates our entire community. And just like you said, you're right, like the latest and greatest technology, I can get all geeked out about that too. But I have to think about someone who may not have cellular service, right? They only have a phone through Wi-Fi. We have to think about individuals who may not even have a phone, and need to use a smart card. And I think one of the challenges that we're all faced, especially with everything that happened in 2021, not only COVID, but a lot of the other social topics, is how can we make sure that no one is left behind? And how do we work with all parts of society and making sure that this solution works for all of us? Because that's truly where a smart city would come into play, is how do all these things fit together? And I think that is where the partnerships with the technology companies, the OEMs, all those that are out there, are making sure that they're thinking about all different customer segments with that. And I think, like you were talking about on the political side, I think that we have to share stories that really buy into people's hearts and minds about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, and how this is going to move our whole community forward is going to be really important. But if we're leaving any segment of the group behind, there's also, especially in a public agency, there can be a lot of discussion about it. And we have to always keep that in mind going forward, that we're not leaving anybody behind. But we need to make sure the technology partners that we're working with are also designing for all of them. Because if your solution doesn't meet everything, I can't use you as a technology solution. So we have to think of all, from the person who's the most technology savvy, the person who's just starting and beginning and start learning something new. I think it's a combination of public and private, and making sure that we're reaching out and thinking about everybody in the community.
Speaking my language, it's like you're trying to get on a whole other topic now in my sweet spot. But it's true. No matter, Dominic, I want to hear from you next on this. No matter what lever you pull, if you play the political game, you go into a booth and pull a lever for the popularity contest, you still have to go to the grocery store. You still have to do these things day to day, right? You still have to get together with family at Thanksgiving, maybe. So human beings are still going to do things. There are certain behaviors that don't have anything to do at all with politics. But I think it's important, like the people that were asking these questions around the challenges, what are some of these people challenges? And maybe for you, if you could focus on the public-private partnership side of things, what are people-related challenges that we need to have eyes wide open for?
Yeah, and actually, I'll talk about. I'll build on to that public-private partnership and what we're trying to do here. I've been advocating for a public-private nonprofit partnership model for quite some time here, because the nonprofit can really sit at the intersection of research institutions, of government, and of industry, and really represent the people and be the voice of the people as these emerging technologies are being rolled out. Because ultimately, when it comes to smart cities, I mean, Sophia nailed it. It's about including everyone, but it's also about trust and transparency, right? And that's really the goal of the nonprofit, sitting at the intersection of these three different industries on these smart city efforts, is really to represent the voice of the people, right? Because even though government, it normally represents the voice of people, sometimes they're more worried about just picking up the trash or delivering the service. They're not always focused on the people. Industry, right, is focused on sometimes profit, not the people. The researchers, they're in their own world, thinking about research and not the people. So really having that nonprofit at the center is really been key, at least here in the greater Phoenix region, to really help accelerate the development of these technologies and the adoption of these technologies, right? We saw a kind of a big failure in the country north of us around what happens when all of a sudden you never included citizens into the engagement process, and you're trying to roll out a big initiative and citizens say, whoa, what are you doing? And it put a whole stop to that big initiative, right? And so we've really been intentive with ensuring that citizen engagement is not a nice to have, it's included from the very beginning. It has a seat at the table. And so I've been advocating for this idea around public-private partnerships, because a lot of these technologies are scary. And so having an organization that's focused on engaging the people around these technologies, how they're going to be used, how it's going to affect their daily lives, how they're going to be included, I think is critical. And so we've really found having that nonprofit sit at the center of it and represent the people has been very, very beneficial for us. And so I advocate for including nonprofits or a smart city nonprofit into these efforts from the very beginning.
Blaine, let's go to you next, and also I'd like to hear if you've got an example about the challenges, the people-related challenges around user experience. I mean, I just kind of flippantly said something about having to download 5 more apps. I like looking for bike share or scooter shares when I go different places, and I'm not a brand loyalist, but one thing I don't like to do is stand around and wait for several minutes to download a new app and then log in and those types of things. So to me, that's at its heart a people issue, not a technology issue, because the people behind the decision to deploy all of these different options weren't thinking through what's the customer experience, what's it going to be like for the traveling public to get from here to there using these different platforms. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what are the people-centered problems that we should be watching for, especially from a state DOT point of view?
Well, I think that's a very important question. Public attitudes are essential, and I will give you a very specific example. We believe that automated vehicle and connected vehicle technologies will save lives, but not if people won't use those technologies. And polls tell us that 70% of the public in the United States are uncomfortable with automated vehicle technology and won't get in one. But I have to remark that of those 70% of the people, most of them have never seen one, and they've never ridden in one. So they're opining about something they don't fully understand. And someone asked the questions about eliminating consumer ignorance in the marketplace. So what we need to do is take the technology to them and let them try it and let them demonstrate it. And so that's one of the things we did with our automated vehicle shuttle pilot. We took it to 8 different areas around the state, specifically targeting very different demographics. And so we could try it out. And while we were there, we not only did kind of a fairly simple, maybe even superficial survey of people's attitudes, but we brought in a team of cognitive psychologists who crafted a very specific study about people's trust. What causes them to trust or distrust the function of the automated vehicle? And we learned some very interesting things about people's attitudes about those things. And what we learned is that if people can experience it and feel safe as they do so, their attitudes about accepting that technology change drastically. So I think it behooves us as government agencies and collaborating partnerships, whatever those are, to get these technologies out and let the public kick the tires, if you will, and then give us feedback, which we need to listen to, so we understand what they're feeling and seeing. I think there's a big role for us there.
And what you were describing, also, I mean, 100% of drivers believe that they're the best. I mean, I'm the greatest driver in the planet. And I know that. And every other driver thinks the same way. And yet, traffic crashes are like the equivalent of a 9/11 every month. It's terrible how many people die in traffic crashes, not even to describe how many people are injured, both short and long term in traffic crashes. So the issue of what people are comfortable with is a huge one. And I think one area where we can help people see these things a little bit differently is to go look at examples in history, like the beginning of the elevator and how terrified the average person was at the thought of being lifted on a platform by somebody pulling a rope to get up to new heights. And then eventually when that was automated, all sorts of examples through history where at the beginning it seems like some otherworldly innovation. And when we get people as participating in the pilot and kind of troubleshooting as we go, we can very quickly make leaps and bounds forward with safety. In the elevator case, that's how the brakes came to be. It came to be the brakes were the key to making safe elevators. Let's shift a little bit, Blaine. While you're still on, I want to talk a little bit about data. A few of you have mentioned data, and then also under something that Sophia mentioned about events of 2020, social unrest. There are several things that we could have hours and hours to talk just about data analytics and data processing. But one thing that I wanted to ask you, or starting with you, how do you look to create effective and efficient data processing and analytics? And then along the way, one of the threads that's going through this conversation is public trust. How do you get people to trust the owners of data, considering like China in 2020 was tracking political dissidents? And we know that they're not the only ones that do this. So if you've got people now, the general public, wondering, should I trust the people who are tracking my movements? How do you process and analyze data, and at the same time get people to know where it is that their data is being held and who is looking at it?
So that's a very appropriate question, and we all struggle with this. I guess I've got three things. First of all, as an agency, we try to use data very effectively in metrics. We try to use data to measure how we're doing, whether that's survey data from the public telling us whether they think we're doing a good job with this or that, or more specifically, we've taken all of our traffic signals and put algorithms on our traffic signals that tell us very specifically how it's performing. Are cars arriving when the signal is green versus red? Which enables us to retime those corridors and tweak their timing so that we can move people more efficiently through the corridors. And we publish those metrics broadly. Anybody can log onto our site and see those metrics and see where we're doing a good job and where we're not doing a good job. So we try to be very metric focused and transparent with those metrics. In the connected vehicle world, secondly, we try to portray very broadly that the data we're using is anonymous. Now, frankly, the public doesn't trust us when we say that. And when I go in front of a physical audience and tell them, here's all the data we want to collect out of your car and use it for these things, and put data back in your car to tell you about hazards that you're approaching, they come up to me afterwards and say, yeah, right, you know who I am. The police are going to pull me over. And I show them the data. So we just have to be very consistent and very persistent about describing that the data is anonymous. We don't want personally identifiable information. And we try really hard with our vendors to make sure we don't get that kind of data. That's not important to us. We don't want to handle it. But we want appropriate data that helps us manage our system better. Third, traditionally, departments of transportation, and I would think we could say the same thing about city and county agencies, are not don't have people on staff that are not well versed historically in data management and manipulation. This is a new thing in the last decade to have all of this data management. So we're trying to bring people in who can do that for us. But frankly, as a government agency, we have a hard time competing for the talent set that we need to do that with the private sector, who can pay more money than we can. So we partner with companies to do that. And in the connected vehicle world, one of the companies we're partnering with is Panasonic. It's a tier 1 supplier to the automotive industry. We're working very hard with them to put a cloud-based analytics system which takes and processes our connected vehicle data and then can push it back into the vehicles. So we've got to take that approach. Vendors call me and say, you need XYZ product, and I go, hey, I don't even understand that. Talk to my IT people, talk to Panasonic, talk to whoever. And so we've just got to figure out how to integrate this, and partnerships help us do that.
Justin, let's hear from you next. How is Detroit handling this? But just both from the point of view of processing and analyzing data, but then also getting people to trust the owners of the data. And I'm curious with Detroit, do the agency authorities, are they the ones maintaining the data, or is then a third party, an outside source, the one that keeps data?
Yeah, I'd say that to begin, in order to build public trust in sharing data, you've got to lead with the need and not necessarily the technology. And so often we roll out, let's say, a camera project on streetlights, and we say, hey, we're putting up cameras everywhere, and the public's immediate question is why. That's a lot different than going to the public and saying, we have an opportunity to make streets safer, and if you're willing to give up a fraction of your data, when we put this camera up at this intersection, we believe we can better time signals or hold walk signals so that it's safer for individuals to cross streets. So leading with that need, I think, is the first step. And then in terms of processing the data, there you've got to begin with first capturing the data from the private sector in a digestible and raw format. Oftentimes, cities will get so excited about the opportunity to deploy something new that they forfeit access to a lot of really important information, that data, that could be manipulated and ingested in ways that tell you incredible insights about what's going on in your city. So as a city, you've got to step up and say, hey, we're more than happy to let this private sector company come in, but we're going to need access to that data in a raw format, and not necessarily through a dashboard, but in an API that we can ingest on our own as a city government to pull the insights out that we need. And then, as Blaine mentioned, cities are always going to be at a disadvantage in terms of hiring top data talent to come in and analyze that data and process it. The one way the cities are never at a disadvantage, though, is in the quality of work the individuals are able to do, and the impact of the work that'll take place. And so, rather than thinking about being at a disadvantage in terms of salary, the city sold the benefit of the work that's going to be able to be done. The fact that an individual is going to come in and make a huge impact on analyzing data on behalf of the city, I think that we could be at an advantage in bringing those individuals to come in and work for public agencies.
Data management, and how do you articulate, this on the storytelling side, how do you articulate why collect data, who collects it, and what it's for?
I think Blaine said it well, is the transparency is key. And the thing that I would add to that is you have to repeat, kind of like your analogy about the elevator, right? People will have to trust over time to make sure that's happening. But I actually think in some ways, it's actually good that people are a little bit skeptical about sharing the data because of how they can see the misuse of data. And I think that actually pushes all of us to actually, think about it even stronger about, how is this data being used? Who's using this data? Who has access to it? How would they get to it? I think that actually pushes us a little bit better to be a little tougher on it and not be flippant about it, right? Because it's really easy to think about data and not think about that the people's information around it. It's just pieces of information that don't apply to me, but it's forcing all of us to think about it a little bit more. So I think there's a healthy skepticism, and that actually make sure that we keep in line with how we should be, and that we're not trying to get everybody's information and building those into our processes. So I think that balance is actually good, even though in the moment it can feel challenging because you just want more and more information.
Dominic, let's go to you next. I'm sure you've got some data challenges having the region the size and density that it is. And I want to hear a little bit if you have anything to offer on this side of public awareness and just getting people to understand the why behind data in your region, because I think regularly about this in all other areas outside of kind of smart cities or transport topics. We give up pieces of data all the time to get a price tag to go down. Anybody that's been using so-called free email has chosen to give up quite a bit of information about themselves. And the more we are online, the more we give up in exchange for either something with a lower dollar amount or just some other convenience. So I'd like to hear from you on this data processing and analytics and storytelling.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and my colleagues have really hit the nail on the head with, kind of the issues and challenges behind data. One thing we're actively trying to do here in the Greater Phoenix region is leverage kind of the marketing and communication arms of all of our partners. So the university, the economic development organizations, the NPOs, the governments, and consistently tell stories, to your point, of how data is being used for good in order to get those positive stories out into the community about how, data was leveraged to reduce congestion in Metro Phoenix by 10%, things like that. The more you're out there talking about it and telling positive stories, just the better the acceptance we see there will be, even though you're always going to run into your challenges. One thing we are kind of working on here, maybe just to add some flavor about what we're working on, our focus is how do we going to get these cities to exchange data across jurisdictional lines to better improve the services we're delivering. So to Sophia's point, I think she mentioned, a while back around getting the regional partners to share data so they can actually start to predict things, right? That's what we're working on as well, is this idea around, a data exchange between our cities. But again, it's very complicated process with everyone having their own legal rules and procurements and things like that. So we're circling around an idea around a civic data trust that again can maybe be housed at a nonprofit that can really be kind of the I guess the holders and the transparency keepers for this data. And so that's kind of what we're looking to do. Again, it's a process. We're building the plan as we're flying. We're trying to work our way through. It's very challenging, but again, I think it's a worthwhile effort. And I think if we can crack that egg, to Sophia's point, if we can help each other. So if anyone else cracks it first, please let us all know so we can help accelerate the development in this area. Because I think there's so many benefits on the outside or on the other side of this that can help us all out. And maybe just one more point to add to the point of kind of not having that expertise in-house. When I worked for the city of Phoenix, we felt this immensely, not having the ability to hire data scientists. And so what we're trying to build here in the region, and honestly, I want to kind of scale it out throughout the country, is almost data science as a service. So, I mean, at Arizona State University, there's thousands of master's data scientist students that are looking for real world practice for their capstones or for their research or for whatever it may be. And so we're trying to develop the program or the platform that enables cities to kind of put data challenges onto a platform and allow data scientists, master students to kind of work on those projects in partnership with the city. So the city kind of receives free service, free R&D, and the students actually get to work on a real life project. And the goal, hopefully, is that they get so in love with solving a civic problem that they just want to go work for the governments after they solve those challenges. So that's something we're working on, data science as a service. So if anyone's interested, we'd love to partner with you on that. So that's some of the things we're thinking about here.
Again, yeah, that issue of whether it's data management or it's any of these other topics, when you stop at one jurisdiction line and go to the next, it's crazy. From a user experience point of view, you see this every day, right? You see the bike lane just end because you're at the city county line, or just whatever it is, the asphalt stop turns to some other thing and then suddenly picks back up because of the swervy jurisdictional line. We humans are a funny bunch in that way. Let me throw out one final question to each of you as we wrap up. We've got owners, operators, manufacturers, and vendors. And if there's one thing that we've all kind of agreed on, granted we're a small echo chamber at the moment this morning, but it's that we have to be able to speak the same language. We have to understand each other. We might not all have the same solutions from one place to the next, but we have to be able to speak the same language. So what message, starting with you, Dominic, what message or challenge would you like to leave with the audience today about deploying smart city applications, getting things going?
Collaboration is going to be really what drives us and propels us to the forefront of technology and innovation and helping really solve urban and social challenges. I actively challenge everyone to get out of the transactional thinking of the past, right? I give you this, you give me this, we sign a contract, we walk away, and we never talk again until I need something or you need something. No, it's really about long-term sustainable relationships. Come to the table, realize you might not get exactly what you want today, but if you're in it for the long term and you really have that ultimate goal of just helping everyone out, you're going to receive the benefits that your organization, your agency, your university is seeking. And so again, it's no longer transactional, it's more long-term relationship building. And so really have a active focus on intentionally collaborating with people from different sectors and different industries. That would be my parting words.
You next. What are your final message or challenge to those joining us today?
I think as we move forward and all the things that we've discussed, I think making sure that we're people focused is probably the key thing I'd want everyone to kind of take back. Is none of these things are going to work if we don't think about the people and the communities who are using it. And I think that the whole mobility industry is going to see more change in the next 10 or 20 years than they've seen in the past 50. And we're at a huge advantage here. And I think being able to make sure that people understand the technologies, understand why we're using it, how it's going to help them, and how it's going to help the places that they live and work, and safety and all those things. I think if we make that, I think we'll be successful.
Your final thoughts for the attendees today?
Yeah, I'd say if there are ever concerns about the rate of adoption in terms of public-private partnerships or in terms of new technology, it's often because of a misalignment between the goals and needs of the cities or the public institutions on one side and the private sector partners on the other side. And so to Dominic's point, let's think about making long-term sustainable relationships where the needs of both groups are clearly understood and presented in a way that they can be met. And if that takes place, and I'm confident that we'll see a much faster adoption of smart city technologies and much more public-private partnerships taking off and being sustainable and lasting for the long term.
And Blaine, how about you? How are you going to propel the audience with some momentum after this talk this morning?
Well, I want to talk about a specific example of collaboration, and there have been a couple of audience questions related to an example of public-private partnerships and how we get industry involved. I want to describe just real briefly an experience I've had which changed the direction of the work that I do. We've been building roads for 100+ years, and we've never really had a reason or an opportunity to talk closely with and collaborate with the automakers, in my opinion. 5 or 6 years ago, I got the opportunity to participate in the development of a new, very small organization that we call the IOO OEM Forum, the Infrastructure Owner Operator OEM Original Equipment Manufacturer Forum. And it's a group of OEMs from state and local DOTs, 6 or 8 of us, and a group of automakers, 6 or 8 of them, who in a pre-competitive arrangement they've got are able to work with us on developing projects together. The projects are important and useful, but more important than that is the communication we had. And I'll never forget the first meeting we had where, as you talk about, we speak a different language. It was just a two before across the head to me to realize that our groups of organizations had very different perspectives, very different paradigms, very different business models, and very different approaches. And the things that we thought they would willingly come to the table with, they weren't going to do. And the things that they thought we had to offer, we didn't have to offer. And so this conversation has led us to learn each other's languages. And what I'm doing in deployment now is different because what I've learned from them. And we've developed this long-term working relationship where we're openly sharing information. We're developing solutions together to problems that one or the other of us had that we didn't understand before we started. And so this collaborative format. And so the people on this call can reach out across the aisle, if you will, and form these relationships with people to collectively work together. We both have to bring resources to the table. It's not me paying all the money and buying your product or the other way around. We have to work together. And this is an example that's worked really well for me and has made a difference in how I operate. So I sort of want to leave that example with people.
Thanks for that, Blaine. I appreciate it. And thank you all panelists. We are about to wrap up. I need to hand it back over to Mark, our host with SAE.
Thank you so very much, Andy. Really appreciate the moderation of this. Blaine, Justin, Sophia, and Dom, I cannot thank you enough for your time and expertise. And clearly, based upon the discussions today, there's a great deal of complexity to consider when looking at smart city strategies and planning. So much work to be done. I had asked the last polling question of the group, which was with regards to profitability and societal benefit. So next month, we have our part 3 of our program, in which we have these great experts here on the screen that will participate in having that discussion. And then last but not least, we talked a lot about the public-private partnership aspect. And upcoming within SAE at the WCX, we are going to have an extensive conversation on public-private partnership. So again, Andy, thank you greatly for your time in moderating this discussion, and all of the panelists for their thoughts and insights. Everyone travel safe, be well, and we'll talk with you soon.